Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to get started shortly, momentarily, with our webinar. We want to thank you for taking the time from your busy schedule to joining us today. We have a very good session. We have several partners from the Commission who have joined us, and hopefully we're going to have a good session. So for housekeeping, we are going to be recording this webinar, and it'll be posted later on our website, which is important, along with any handouts. So the handouts, the PowerPoint that we're using, will be available with the PDF version, and as well as so I want folks to realize that, along with any other information that our presenters would like to share with us, will be available and posted on our website. We do have a Q&A session on your computer. You should see, all of you, on underneath where it says the Q&A. Use that if you have questions as the panelists are talking. We will be taking some questions in between the panelists. The questions that we're not able to get to today, again, we'll be posting all the questions and answers on the website following this event. So thank you for doing that. We do have with us today some panelists that are hard of hearing. I want to make sure that you have we have the presenters so you could see their camera. So our camera, we should be seeing the panelists as well as our interpreters. So hopefully that's going to work out well for everyone, and we'll be able to follow along. So the Attorney General, the Elder Abuse Commission is the Attorney General. We also was codified in 2009. So we have been now in existence for over 10 years. The Office Elder Abuse Commission has been very instrumental in advocacy around the issues of policies that affect elder adults and elder justice. So we're excited to be here and be a part of the Elder Abuse Commission. And we're every June we'll be sponsoring an event. This is actually the 3rd annual Elder Abuse Awareness Day that the office has sponsored. New technology, and we might as well apologize up front. This is the first time we're tackling a webinar of this magnitude. We're hoping that we'll build off this, so be patient with us, but I think we're in for a good webinar. Judy?
Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Judy. I want to introduce everyone to the chair of the Elder Abuse Commission, and Judy Brachman. Judy, is there anything you would like to tell our attendees?
Thanks, Sylvia, and I do want to welcome everybody to the Elder Abuse webinar. I'm Judith Brachman, chair of the Elder Abuse Commission, and it's extraordinary that more than 500 people have actually registered for the symposium. Your presence here today speaks to the importance of working with and solving the issues of financial exploitation of older adults, and we appreciate your commitment to making sure that older adults here in Ohio are not taken advantage of by unscrupulous persons preying on their vulnerabilities. I want to thank the Ohio Attorney General Dave Yost for sponsoring this event, and his support has been very important. And also the Commission's Education Committee, which will be introduced in a moment, for their input as well into today's program. And I want to note especially that Sylvia has contributed untold hours of work to put this webinar together, and I want to thank her for that. And with no further ado, I will turn the program back over to Sylvia.
Thanks, Judy. Thank you very much. Judy's been with us since the beginning of the Elder Abuse Commissions. I think she's seen it grow over the years, and it's nice to have her support. So we have 4 different committees. A committee that really works hard in putting together our events, whether it's for consumers or for the public, is the Education Committee. And I want to make sure that we give our props to the co-chairs of the Education Committee. So we have Dan Arzano, who works with the Ohio Department of Commerce, has recently joined us, and we're excited to have Dan, and him and I have worked on several projects together. And then Heidi Turner Stone, who works with the Ohio Department of Jobs and Family Services, And this department has been a member of the commission since its onset. We welcome Heidi as one of the co-chairs, and we're really excited that we'll be bringing future events like this. And hopefully one day we're going to be back to working with you in person. But I want to thank both of them and look forward to working with them. This particular webinar could not have been done without some help with not just the members of the commission, but specifically, we were very interested in getting and presenting the view of how do we combat elder financial exploitation, utilizing and leveraging federal, state, and local resources. So I want to specifically give a shout out to the Federal Trade Commission, the Cleveland Clinic, the Ohio Department of Commerce, the Department of Justice, and Cuyahoga County Senior Adult Services, who you'll be hearing each of our panelists are coming from the viewpoints from these organizations, and I want to make sure we recognize them. So most of you are getting some professional credit. So we did have some help to get the CLEs. This program was approved for 2 hours. It was also approved for 2 credit hours for social workers and counselors. All of you will receive after this a survey that's specifically asking for your input following this event, so we make sure we qualify and get your certificates to you. So as I mentioned to you, we were really important of looking at today's project, webinar. We really wanted to focus on what's going on in Ohio and how can we use federal statutes to combat these issues. So hopefully by the end of today, you're going to learn some new things and techniques. What are some of the organizations using to combat elder financial exploitation? The one thing we're hoping also is that we're going to learn under what circumstances is it appropriate to call Adult Protective Services versus, for instance, our office, the Consumer Protection, or when should we be utilizing our federal resources? When should we call the Department of Commerce? So some of the difficulties in working these cases is that we don't particularly have one agency that takes care of all the issues. So it's real important as professionals that we understand when we should be tapping resources and when should we be working together, and when do we want to hand off to another organization so it's seamless for our victims. So the learning objectives, which we just kind of talked about, that's because we're giving credit. I want to see a little bit, so give our panelists a little bit of idea of who's in the audience. Give me 1 second. We're going to ask you all to answer this question for us. Okay, so we have a question that's up that's pretty much tells us who do we have in the audience. We're trying to figure out, do we have adult protective service workers? Do we have medical professionals, legal professionals, social services that are in other areas, or other professionals? Just give that a few more seconds. Just a few more seconds and we're going to show the results. I'm not exactly sure what happened. So it looks like we have mostly a mixture of professionals, a lot of folks that work with adult protective services, and a few folks, quite a few legal folks in the legal industry. And then others. We have some folks that are mixed in with the the banking industry, or the paraprofessionals. So this question is to get from the audience a little bit of what type of information you're looking for in today's webinar. So is this a situation where you're looking for general information? Are you looking for information to address the common challenges? Are you looking for information that helps you develop some effective strategies? Or are you looking for information of how to, when to use state and local resources? And it looks like we have a few more seconds on this, but it looks like we almost have almost as many people answering each question. So a lot of folks are just saying they want some general information. We have a lot of folks saying that they are looking for understanding what's challenges, how to deal with challenges. And then about 73 folks are looking for information of how to be to effectively investigate these cases. And then the last one, so far we have about 86 people that are saying that they want to know when to access state versus federal. So this information will help our speakers as they go forward in terms of maybe spending some time on some information more so than other questions. So Melissa, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yep, give me 1 second because I want to get out of the polling. So I'm going to introduce my section chief is Melissa Wright, and she's going to talk to us about the elder. Here we go. She's going to be talking to us about the consumer protection section. So Melissa, you should be able to take it from here. I've passed the baton to you.
Excellent. Thank you for having me. I appreciate having the opportunity to speak about the consumer protection section and share the resources that our section has available, not just for all consumers of Ohio, but especially our older Ohioans. Our section's mission is to protect Ohio's consumers and businesses by ensuring a safe and strong marketplace. And we do that through education and outreach efforts, which Sylvia's section, the Elder Justice Unit, of which we'll talk a little bit more about later, does a large part of that through dispute resolution and through the enforcement of consumer laws. Our section enforces more than 25 consumer protection laws, as well as various federal laws. We offer a dispute resolution services for a variety of consumer complaint issues, including motor vehicle issues, home improvement repairs, collection issues, and other professional services. Essentially, there are some exceptions under the law, some areas where we do not have jurisdiction, but pretty much anything an individual engages in for personal, family, or household use could be considered a consumer transaction under our statute. We do have specialized areas of dispute resolution involving identity theft and motor vehicle title issues. Briefly, our identity theft unit was formed back in 2012, and it helps to rectify the effects of identity theft. Our staff members work with creditors, the consumer reporting agencies, and others that may have misinformation regarding consumers due to identity theft. We also have a title defect rescission unit. The staff members in that unit work with consumers who purchase used motor vehicles and who do not receive title to their vehicles within 40 days of purchase. So when a consumer purchases a vehicle, they don't receive the title, we'll reach out to the dealer, try to get the title. If they refuse, ultimately we can pay money out of a fund, and then we will oftentimes have to file suit against that dealership to recoup the monies owed to the fund. And then, of course, we have our Elder Justice Unit, which I'm going to talk about a little more in depth later. So on this slide, I've included some statistics for our civil and criminal investigative units. You can see there the number of our civil investigations, the number of lawsuits and judgments or settlements our civil legal unit has obtained, as well as our economic crimes unit. And I will say for 2020, we're on track to meet or exceed these numbers for our section. As of today, we filed 149 civil investigations we've opened. We've filed 23 lawsuits, and we have obtained 12 judgments or ADCs. The reason the numbers are sort of disparate between the lawsuits filed and the judgments and ADCs obtained is it's our understanding that some of the courts are holding off on signing the judgment entries due to COVID-19. So like with most things COVID related, that's obviously affected our civil litigation matters. Our economic crimes unit was formed in 2011 to provide a criminal justice response to crimes against consumers, including older Ohioans. Our office does not possess original criminal jurisdiction, so our economic crimes unit attorneys in that unit, they work cooperatively with the 88 county prosecutors and local law enforcement agencies within those jurisdictions. And half of all the cases that the economic crimes unit brings involve older Ohioans. In 2020 alone, in the past 6.5 months, we've filed and indicted around 3 to 5 major cases that have involved older Ohioans, and those charges typically include theft against the elderly. They can take a variety of forms. It can be scams, it can be home improvement, contractor issues, or it could be, you know, someone coming in pretending to be a caregiver. But our economic crimes unit handles any of those complaints that have a criminal bent. Our office also offers an informal dispute resolution program through our complaint unit. This is our IDR program. Our section typically receives and processes over 25,000 complaints each year. Within that unit, our PIAs, or our Public Inquiries Assistants, they'll intake the complaints and they'll review them to confirm it's a matter our office has jurisdiction to review. Sometimes complaints come to our, I'll call it our standard complaint unit, and they actually need to go over to Sylvia's shop in the Elder Justice Unit. So if we get any complaints that come to the standard unit, our PIAs will take those over to Sylvia's staff. And then if it is something that we are going to work in our standard unit, our complaint specialists will contact the business in an attempt to resolve the dispute and bring the business into compliance. There are multiple ways individuals can contact our office to file a complaint. We have the AGO Help Center. That is the number I've listed on the slide. They're open from 8 to 7. They take the calls. That is also the number where a lot of individuals, if they're wanting to report a complaint regarding elder fraud, abuse, or neglect, sometimes those complaints come through that number, and then they'll get routed to the Elder Justice Unit under Sylvia. In addition to our standard OhioAttorneyGeneral.gov website, we have a dedicated microsite for consumer protection matters, and that's ohioprotects.org. You can get on that site, and later on in the presentation, I'll show you a screenshot of the homepage, and you can file a complaint. You can file it online. You can download a PDF complaint form that links directly to our AGO website. Typically, if we weren't all, sort of working remotely for COVID, we take complaints, like I said, in a variety of manners. Most often, we take complaints over the web or through the call center. But we do, folks still sometimes want to download that PDF form and send everything in through the mail. And then when we were in the office, we were also taking walk-ins to file complaints. Obviously, right now, with everything that's happened with COVID and with all the staff and agencies, working remotely, we're doing the majority of those complaints through the web and the call center. I wanted to share some statistics with, what our staff has looked at in terms of complaints. Those are the statistics for 2019. Of those 21,000 complaints that we received, 13,000, a little over 13,000 were worked through that IDR process. The other complaints were potentially complaints that we either had an open investigation or litigation on, so those went straight to the investigators or the attorneys. It's possible we didn't have jurisdiction, so they were sent out to another agency that did have jurisdiction, and that's why those numbers don't match up. Of those complaints, around 8,200 of those were filed online via the web. A little over 10,000 came through the call center, and then we had around 3,250 that were done through manual entry. And again, those are those walk-ins, or those are people who mailed in a complaint form. Of that entire number, we had 2,186 individuals who checked the complaint form that they were the age 65 years or older. We have a dedicated spot on our complaint form for various vulnerabilities, including veterans, military, and if you're 65 years or older. And again, nobody has to check it. It's not a required box, but we did have in 2019 a little over 2,100 that did. Our top complaint categories for 2019, and I've included a slide for 2020, you'll see they remain pretty consistent. Usually it is motor vehicles at the top. Most everyone has a vehicle, they drive, so that's a major purchase next to someone's home. That's probably the largest purchase any individual makes. So that's often the top level of complaint categories that we receive. And then in 2020, just to kind of compare back to 2019, what we're seeing in complaints, so far for the past 6.5 months, we've already received a little over 13,000 complaints, with more than half of those being sent through IDR. Unfortunately, we are unable to differentiate how those complaints were received, whether it was via the web, the call center, et cetera, and that's due to COVID, because since we've had to work remotely since early to mid-March, we had to make some adjustments on how we took in complaints. So all of the complaints that come in now, even if they're through the call center, show up as a web complaint. So we can't really nail down the differences there. You will see the categories for the top complaints for 2020 are a little different. Motor vehicles, still number 1, but you'll see that shopping, food and beverages, and professional services jumped up to 2 and 3. And we believe this is because of complaints that are associated with the coronavirus. I've got a slide that's coming up where we talk about that. And you'll see that we've received a lot of complaints regarding price gouging, so that's going to affect the shopping category, complaints involving refunds and scams, and that's going to affect your professional services category. So our Elder Justice Unit was established in 2014 to increase the investigation and prosecution of elder abuse cases and to improve victims' access to services in Ohio. Housed in the Consumer Protection section and under the directorship of Sylvia, the Elder Justice Unit reviews complaints involving elder abuse, fraud, and neglect. The unit and that staff act as a liaison to adult protective services, to law enforcement and other agencies, and they help with victim advocacy and assistance. The unit also works with several other sections of the Attorney General's office and making referrals where necessary, including crime victim services, healthcare fraud, special prosecution, and BCI. Since 2014, you'll see the statistics there, the unit has assisted more than 2,050 older Ohioans, and at least since 2016, the unit has provided more than 199 trainings, reaching over 13,000 attendees. With response to COVID-19 and how our office has responded to that across the board and within consumer protection, including in the Elder Justice Unit and our regular complaint unit, we've done a few things. As I mentioned, a large majority of the complaints we received since March 1st relate to COVID-19. You'll see the statistics there. That's over 2,000 coronavirus-related complaints. Of that, more than half relate to price gouging, or price gouging allegations. From those complaints and then other sources of information our attorneys and investigators have found and has brought to our attention, we have opened up 58 coronavirus-related investigations, of which 45 in the majority involved price gouging allegations, and 13 involved scams or other issues. One of the complaints that I was talking about with some other panelists that I thought was relevant to this presentation was we're getting a lot of complaints or scam allegations regarding the stimulus check payments, and some of the complaints we saw coming in related specifically to individuals, to residents in nursing homes or assisted living facilities who were receiving stimulus check payments, and then those payments were being, they were told they had to sign them over, or they were being taken by the nursing home. I think, as everyone knows, that is not an acceptable use of that payment. The nursing homes can't be coming in and taking those to pay for Medicaid or other expenses. So we recently had received a few of these complaints, and the first one we received, typical complaint. We had, or what we thought was a typical complaint. We had a daughter that filed a complaint, said that her mother was in a nursing home, had received her stimulus payment, and the nursing home had made her sign the check over. So immediately that caught our attention. We assigned an investigator to take a look at that, to contact the daughter, to contact the nursing home, and try to find out what was happening. We felt this was important enough that we didn't want to take this through our typical IDR route, that we wanted to kind of escalate this and try to get an answer pretty quickly. So when our staff looked into it, unfortunately, it sounded like things weren't really as they were presented to us initially. Again, we get the complaint from the daughter, says the mother's in a facility, they're taking her payment. When we look into it, it actually appeared that the mother, on her account, there was a past medical balance owed due to withdrawal for personal use from the daughter. So Medicaid had denied a payment in the past. The resident, the mother, knew she had this past due balance. Apparently it was the fault of her daughter. She's cognitive. She wants to pay her debts, and, it was her choice. And she made it very clear, and the nursing home was able to provide some notes from her that said, I want this money. I'm giving you, it wasn't the whole check, I think it was part of it, to go towards this debt. And the nursing home, made it very clear that, we do try to accommodate the wishes of our residents. This is what she's wanting. Clearly we're happy to, redeposit this money into her account. And when they did that, even then, the resident, signed a note saying, this is not what I want. I want this applied to this debt. So it was unique in that, typically we get these complaints and we're very quick to, want to look into them and to make sure that we don't have someone, especially an older Ohioan, being taken advantage of. And here, with some quick investigative work, we were, luckily able to find out that was not the case that was happening here. So that's just an example of one of the more interesting complaints that we've received related to coronavirus. Additionally, in response to COVID, our office has proposed some legislation regarding price gouging and panic buying. We're working on that with Senators Manning and Wilson. Ohio is one of the few states that does not have a specific price gouging statute, so we have to rely on bringing unfair and unconscionable claims under the Consumer Sales Practices Act. So that has been proposed. It's currently in the hearing and comment process, so we're still waiting in our office to see ultimately what that new legislation and law will look like. One of the other things that our office has done recently that affects a lot of older Ohioans, and Ohioans of any age, are robocalls, and I'm talking about the illegal robocalls. We have, in this past National Consumer Protection Week, this past March, Attorney General Yost announced the formation of our new Robocall Enforcement Unit and the development of a tool that lets consumers report unwanted and illegal robocalls to our office. The unit is made up of attorneys and investigators, some of which who were already involved in legal action against companies responsible for the onslaught of these annoying and illegal calls. That unit is dedicating to rooting out the bad actors at every level. So they're looking at not just the caller that you speak to or your loved one speaks to, but the payment processors, the individuals who come up with the leads list that put your name or your loved one's name on that list for someone to call. We know that in 2019, Ohioans were hit with an estimated 2.2 billion robocalls, and we're looking to try to put a dent in that traffic. We also know that because oftentimes they have worked for so many years, and they've just like with other scams and complaints, our older Ohioans have worked and they've they're seen as maybe having more assets and more funds available. They become a target for scams, and robocall scams are no different. So our unit that we formed is going to take a multi-pronged approach to investigating these. Since March 4th up through last week, we'd already received over 17,000 notifications and complaints. In addition to this unit, we have a couple of ways that individuals can now file and notify our office. We tried to make it as easy as possible and to have a very streamlined complaint process. Again, you can go to ohioprotects.org/robo. I will show you the website in a minute. You can file a complaint online. You can text ROBO to 888-111, and then you will receive a link back via text message that links you directly to that web page where you can fill it out. I think it takes about a minute or so. There's some information that is required, some that's optional, but that enables us to input all of that data and see if we can, ultimately trace the source of those calls and be able to go after those bad actors. One of the things you'll see here is that new ohioprotects.org. This is that microsite that I said is dedicated to robocalls. Our tagline there is just don't answer. If you get a call or if your loved one receives a call from a number they don't know, just don't answer. Let it go to voicemail. If it's important, someone will leave a message. If you scroll down, and I apologize, this is not a live shot, but if you scroll down on that main page, you'll see videos about the new robocall initiative, information about spoofing, about robocall myths. And then there's also a link to two new publications the unit has done, Robocall BASICS and the Do's and Don'ts of Unwanted Calls. In addition to being on Ohio Protects, both of those publications are found on our main website at ohioattorneygeneral.gov. At the top of that web page, the home page, there's a link for publication. If you click on that, then you can click on a link for consumers. You will see both of these. I've included them in the slide. The Robocall Basics is a 2-page flyer. And again, it gives you the signs of an illegal robocall and some tips for do's and don'ts about robocall smarts, and then some robocall facts. Our do's and don'ts is a little card. And again, top do, register your phone number with the do not call registry, and some don'ts there, and some tips that individuals can follow as well. And again, remember, tagline, just don't answer if you don't know the number. In addition to the Robocall Enforcement Unit and the new publications we've put out there, we also have been revising the publications for our Elder Justice Unit. Our Elder Justice palm card, which you see here front and back, it provides information, statistics, signs of elder abuse to watch out for, and information on what our unit can do to help. We also have additional publications, which again can be found on that main Ohio Attorney General website. You go to publications, and then there's actually a seniors tab where all of these can be found. We have those publications. It's a reference guide for families. It gives you information on how to protect your loved ones by learning how to recognize the warning signs, such as unexplained monetary withdrawals, changes to official documents like wills, if your loved one has suddenly withdrawn from family and friends. The publication on recognizing and reporting patient abuse and neglect provides you with information on how to do that and how to contact our office and others. We have the Elder Fraud and Financial Exploitation brochure. This, similar to the first one, this is a reference guide directly for older adults. And again, it goes over some just information on warning signs if someone might be looking to take advantage of them directly. And finally, the unit has the phone scams checklist. These are tips to protect against the typical phone scams we see in our section. Unfortunately, a lot of which target older Ohioans, such as the grandparent scam. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that, but essentially it's someone calls, an older Ohioan, they pretend to be their grandson or granddaughter and saying, hey, I'm, stuck on vacation and I need money. So we have that, and we have the imposter scam as well. Finally, the most recent one we've done as part of the Elder Justice Unit is Cyber Smarts for older Ohioans. Again, this is a 2-page flyer. We know that older Ohioans can be vulnerable to scams when using computers and technology. So this flyer provides useful tips about the internet, email, and computer maintenance. And again, it has information on how to report fraud or financial exploitation and different services and resources for our office. And finally, I wanted to mention our office has now formed a dedicated web page to the Elder Abuse Commission. Working with Sylvia and Judy, we formulated this page so there was a dedicated place on our website. The landing page, as you see here, describes the commission. Off to the left, it has a link to each of the committees. It has information on Elder Abuse Awareness Day, commission members and meetings, and it also has links to the Ohio Revised Code where the commission is codified and the code where all of the duties of the commission can be found. And that is all I have.
No, you have one more.
I do? Oh, questions?
So, April, does Melissa have any questions?
Yeah, so there's at least one quick question, but I just wanted to let everybody know, because I know we've gotten this a couple times in the chat, that this will be posted on our website later. So everybody will have access to this webinar and additional information. Everybody will get a copy. So one of the questions, Melissa, was if everything is still available, even though there's a lot of remote work going on. All the services on our section, are they still available even though everyone's working remotely?
Absolutely. All of our complaint services are still available. Individuals can contact our office like they normally could. The only exception is we don't take walk-ins. If we know a lot of times older Ohioans, they may not be comfortable using the internet and filing a complaint online. They may be feeling more comfortable if they have someone, download that PDF for them so they can fill it out and, handwrite it and mail it in, or they can call. So all of those services are still available.
Okay, and do you know if there's any other webinars or trainings that will be available regarding elder abuse, exploitation, and abuse?
I actually think Sylvia could answer that question probably a little better than I could.
Well, I know that the Ohio Coalition for Adult Protective Services is going to be having a webinar conference this year virtual because of all this. Their keynote speaker is actually going to be from the Elder Justice Initiative, and it's Susan Lynch. So I think that question can probably, I would probably recommend that they check, keep up with the Elder Abuse Commission, and we can probably shoot us an email and we can get them that information.
Okay, that's all for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Melissa, thank you so much for your talk. So now we're going to be switching gears a little bit to hear from Harris, who is going to speak to us. Why can't I find him? Speak to us from kind of like the. So Harris, I have you? You should be able to talk. Can you check in right now?
This is Harris.
Okay, perfect. So, so I'm going to, since you're talking, how about if I let you introduce yourself? And I'm going to get the next slide up. 1 second.
Terrific. Thanks.
You're welcome.
So my name is Harris Centuria. I'm an attorney with the Federal Trade Commission. I work in the FTC's East Central Region office, which is right here in beautiful Cleveland, Ohio. I do want to say off the bat that while I am appearing on behalf of the FTC, any views that I express in the course of my remarks are just mine and not necessarily those of the commission or any commissioner or any other person. Just a little bit of background about the FTC. And first, let me actually take a second and say thanks very much to Sylvia for inviting us to participate, and also to the team for overcoming some tech problems that we have had. So I'm very, very appreciative. I also want to echo Melissa's presentation. The Ohio Attorney General is a phenomenal resource for Ohioans regarding consumer protection concerns. So the FTC is the federal primary consumer protection agency. We do have some carve-outs, but broadly, we are the consumer protection folks federally. Most of our personnel are in Washington, D.C. In the regional office in Cleveland, we have about 12 attorneys and a couple of investigators. And our region covers 7 states and the District of Columbia. Ohio is one of those states. So you can imagine, with relatively few people and a relatively broad area to cover, we are very excited always to partner with other agencies, with other law enforcers, to try to get the word out, to try to get cases done. And this presentation is a big part of that. At the FTC, we enforce multiple consumer protection statutes, primarily the FTC Act. And the FTC Act broadly prohibits unfair or deceptive practices in interstate commerce. The other space where you'll see us a lot is we enforce the telemarketing. The telemarketing sales rule is our rule coming out of the Telemarketing and Consumer Fraud and Abuse Act. So we do a lot on the telemarketing front as well, and a lot on internet marketing. We do work on things like national advertising and known companies that maybe run into practices that are problematic. But a lot of what I do, a lot of what we do in the Cleveland office is tackling sort of the fly-by-night scammers, or the businesses that are just there for mass marketing fraud purposes via phone, via internet, or via mail. We are, at the FTC, we are only a civil law enforcement agency. What that means is that when we build a case, we can bring it in federal court. We'll go into federal court and ask a judge to halt deceptive or unfair practices. We will usually try to seek not only an injunction, but also try to get consumers their money back if we can. But although we're civil only, we do partner a lot with criminal law enforcement agencies. And I just want to take a second to mention that a lot of times, I think those of you who are out there who are primarily in the criminal law enforcement field, sometimes there's a sense of, you get a complaint, particularly in a consumer protection type situation, and you think, well, that's just civil. And I understand that there is a lot on your plates. But if nothing else, I'd like you to leave this session thinking, well, if it's civil, maybe I can send them to the Ohio AG, or maybe I can send them to the FTC. And we are very happy to pick up information in that regard. So please think of us, and think of us as a resource to help you deal with those kinds of situations. So the other thing, speaking of being a resource, is that we have, at the FTC, we have a division in our Bureau of Consumer Protection called the Division of Consumer and Business Education. And these are folks whose full-time job is to try to figure out how to communicate as clearly as possible, both to consumers and to the business community, what the laws are, what the rights are, and how to protect yourselves. And so another thing I want to mention and ask those of you who maybe aren't in law enforcement, but maybe are in private practice in the legal field, if you think about going to the FTC site, and subscribing to our consumer blog or our business blog, you can learn a lot, not only about the scams that are affecting your clients as victims, but also you can learn a lot about how businesses can comply with the law. And then the other thing I want to mention, and this is all as preface with that, with the one slide, is one of the big resources that we have is something called Consumer Sentinel, which is a database where we collect complaints about consumer protection related complaints. Generally, over the last couple of years, we've taken in more than 3 million complaints in that database, more than 1.5 million fraud complaints per year. We also run a website called identitytheft.gov, which is a great resource for identity theft, and those complaints in Consumer Sentinel include, it will include identity theft complaints, but over 1.5 million fraud complaints. And the first thing I want to touch on right away is what we're seeing on the coronavirus. Obviously, that's the topic of the moment, and a lot of the scams related to the coronavirus will target, unfortunately, older consumers. So what you see there on the screen is ftc.gov/coronavirus. If you go there, you can get a lot of resources both on the consumer side and on the business side for helping see what's going on, getting tips on what are the latest scams and how to deal with them. What are the latest compliance issues and how to address those. If we can go to the next slide. So the biggest areas where we're seeing scams right now related to the coronavirus relate to treatments and cures. Vaccine offers, test kits, you can see miracle cures. Also Medicare-related scams where you have folks who are contacting, folks who are contacting consumers via phone and claiming to be Medicare and saying that if they'll just respond and give information to the person on the phone, they can help them, protect them against coronavirus. What we find, and I'll emphasize this a little bit more, is the more that folks know specifically what the scams are that are targeting them, the better equipped they are to defend themselves. So I sound like I'm just running through a list here, vaccines, test kits, but I want to dwell on these to sort of say these are the things that specifically people should be on the lookout for and should be suspicious of. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to see at ftc.gov/coronavirus and on our blogs. The agency has sent now more than, I believe, 160 warning letters to folks on the internet or otherwise advertising cures or vaccines or treatments or air purifiers that are problematic. And we have taken an approach in that regard where we are trying to disrupt. We're trying to warn people and stop them from making these claims more than just trying to build cases. And oftentimes when we build cases, we do that undercover. But for these kinds of things, we're trying to just get the word out. So if you see these kinds of things being offered, even if you haven't lost money, even if your clients or the people you work with haven't lost money, reporting those to the FTC is very, very helpful because we can step in and attempt to shut those down. Can we see the next slide? Another aspect of the coronavirus, the pandemic, is stimulus checks. These few talking points are points that we are using when we speak to the general public, and we would like you all to repeat to folks that you encounter. The government's not going to ask for upfront payment. The government's not going to ask for this kind of personally identifiable information, sensitive information. And there is nobody on the outside who's going to help you get your money faster. And these are very common schemes that we're seeing. We're posting warnings about those. The other thing that I want to mention with this slide is something that Melissa talked about in detail, which I really appreciated, which was the issue of stimulus checks and nursing home or assisted care residences. We actually posted a blog post about that, both on our consumer blog and on the business blog. And again, at ftc.gov/coronavirus, you will see those blog entries. And with those, what I want to emphasize is not only are we saying what we're seeing, and we're hearing this from other states as well, but there are specific citations that you'll see there linked on those blog posts that will help you understand what the law is that's impacting this question of facilities taking stimulus checks. So it can help you be informed not only as a general matter, but also very specifically as to what the statutory and regulatory issues are. Next slide. The other area that we're seeing a lot of, both with coronavirus and also, frankly, with a lot of the social issues in the country, is folks who are trying to raise money. And we see this a lot, unfortunately, as fake charities. That site that's linked there, ftc.gov/charity, gives a lot of tips on how specifically to check things out and to be careful when donating. And we encourage you to visit that. We encourage you to send your friends, family, clients to that site to help be educated about how to give carefully and thoughtfully in this environment. Next slide. Okay, so on the point that we're all here for, which is sort of thinking about our older population in particular, the FTC has issued reports over the last 2 years to Congress about our efforts specifically in protecting older consumers. So what you're seeing there is the front page of the report that we issued in October of 2019. I actually think it's very interesting reading. Maybe not everybody does, but I encourage you, you can find it on our website. But I want to take a few minutes with specific data from that report to highlight some things that I want you all to know about. So next slide. So based on the over 1 million fraud complaints that we saw, what we did, and not everybody reports their age. This is something Melissa mentioned as well. We don't always take a report on somebody's age, but when we do, we use that data to analyze the complaints. So I think about 40% of our complainants reported their ages. And here's a few things that we took out of this. One is that folks 60 and up are more likely to report, to file fraud reports where there's no reported dollar loss. And that's really, really helpful to us. When you think about a database that has over 1 million complaints in it, and we're trying to see what the patterns are and build our cases against these nationwide or international actors, having complaints even when there's no dollar loss is very valuable to us. So we see the older consumers as being a really valuable kind of front line for us and giving us information that's valuable to us. But you also see on this slide that the older consumers maybe are a little bit less likely to file fraud reports indicating that they had lost money. And I think that this is just speculation on my part, but I think that some of what we're going to talk about today, dealing with questions of competence and how you sort of think about broader intervention, I do think we will see that older consumers can be sometimes reticent to report losses because they are concerned about how it will look. We're all reticent to report being scammed. None of us wants to be embarrassed. But I think for older folks, sometimes there's an additional concern of, is this going to cause somebody to question my competence? And it's really important to know that all of us are vulnerable. All of us are vulnerable to scams. And so one of the things that we talk about is when you've got an older family member or client or someone you work with who's been the victim of a scam, one of the most important things is to understand that it could have happened to anybody. And a response that says, how could you be so dumb, or how could you be so stupid to fall for that? That's so obviously a scam. That's just going to drive that person further into their shell. And even worse, if they're in ongoing contact with a scammer, that's going to drive them toward the scammer. They're going to think the scammer is the only person that understands me, respects me, is willing to say positive things to me. So we really encourage folks to understand that anybody could be a victim. It does not necessarily signify any loss of competence. And so please be understanding and thoughtful. If we could have the next slide. And this gets to something that Melissa talked about as well, which is when we do have older consumers losing money, they lose a lot more. And this relates to folks losing their savings, being targeted repeatedly, or being targeted with larger scams because they are viewed correctly in many cases as having larger sums saved up that they could be victimized by. So we have fewer reports of loss, but bigger losses. The next slide. And then this is a key that we really want to focus on, which is, like I said, when folks know what scams are coming, they're much more likely to be able to avoid them. So what you can see here, so the thick bars, those thick darker blue bars, those show reports related to scams coming from consumers 60 and older. The thinner, lighter bar shows you percentages coming from folks who are 20 to 59. And what you can see at that top line, tech support scams, you can see they're massively a bigger problem for older consumers. Online shopping is still a big problem, but you can see that folks in the 20 to 59 age range are going to have a lot more reports related to that. So tech support is a big deal. If you look down, kind of scan down your eyes down that graph, you'll also see romance scams, which you might hear a little bit more about later, which are really kind of devastating. But also then you'll see disproportionate numbers on the prizes or sweepstakes or lottery scams. And then also what we refer to generally as family or friend imposter scams. And that again, Melissa brought that up as oftentimes we think about the grandparent scheme. So here we can see what these data are telling us is you've got some things that specifically target older consumers or are aimed at older consumers and are more effective at older consumers. And there's actual research that has been done that shows that when somebody has been warned about a specific kind of scam, they are less likely to be victimized by that particular kind of scam. So general warnings are good. We always say, folks always say, if it looks too good to be true, it probably is. But if you can be specific, that can really help. The other thing that we know is that consumers like to be empowered. Go ahead, Sylvia. No, this is good. We're going to the next slide. Consumers like to feel like they are forward slides, like that they are able to do something about what's happening. And so our Division of Consumer and Business Education carefully developed a campaign we call Pass It On, which is about providing older consumers with their own materials that they can share with their peers, that they can organize their own sort of group discussions about these scams, what scams are targeting their communities. And of course, they're also very useful materials for those of you who might have clients or might have community groups that you speak to. These materials are really helpful in how specifically to talk to older consumers. And so if you go to the next slide, what we have are a series of tips. We have bookmarks and we have tear sheets that in very direct language explain a variety of types of scams that specifically target older consumers and tell them what they should expect to see, how they should be wary, what they should do. And they're action oriented, and each of these bullet points is a different tear sheet or is information on our website that you can use to speak to these specific kinds of schemes. And we can go to the next slide. So a lot of what we're doing obviously is on the web, and we emphasize that. I would strongly encourage everybody that's on this call to consider subscribing to our alerts. You'll know the latest in what's going on in terms of scams that are targeting consumers. You can also subscribe there at that link to the business, what we call our business blog, which will update not only target scams that target businesses, but also helping businesses remain in compliance. Our complaint assistant, ftc.gov/complaint. We do want to hear from you. We do, the Consumer Sentinel database draws from many sources, including the Ohio AG's office, including Better Business Bureaus. One thing I do want to mention is the AG's office will, as Melissa talked about, will attempt to mediate specific complaints and try to help consumers on a case-by-case basis. The FTC, because of the volume of complaints that we get and the size that we are, we do not do that. We do want the complaints because the data are very, very helpful to us. But a complaint to the FTC is not something where the consumer or you will immediately get a call back necessarily, although you might if there's an investigation. So reporting to the Ohio AG is great. Reporting to us is great. And then you see the Pass It On resources there, ftc.gov/passiton, We'll show you lots that's helpful in dealing with older consumers and clients. You have our coronavirus, ftc.gov/coronavirus, as well as the more federal, general federal stuff. I guess stuff is not the right word, federal resources. And then next slide. This is where you can order at ftc.gov/bulk order. You can order at no charge materials that you can provide in your communities or in facilities where you work or to your clients that are, again, these very specifically targeted consumer education materials, ftc.gov/bulk order. There'll be no charge to you. And you can go there and you can, for example, you can look at the Pass It On materials that are available on that site and order them if you think they're valuable. You can also reach this site via the Pass It On page, the link that we had earlier. Also on that Pass It On page and on our website, we have sample PowerPoints. We have sample social media materials you can use. We have that for coronavirus as well. We have videos. So there's a lot of resources that you all can use in your work that we are very happy for you to use and amplify. So I hope that's been helpful. I think that's my last substantive slide.
Yeah, you're right, Harris. You did a great job, and we appreciate your information. We want to know, Monica, do we have any questions for Harris that came up through the Q&A?
Yes, there are two questions. One question here is, as far as filing a complaint, a participant in the webinar tried to report phone and email attempts, but the FTC website still screened for an actual monetary loss. So how would one file a complaint mainly to be reporting and get it into the database?
So there will be a question about monetary loss, but you shouldn't be stopped by that. It should be a question where you say, if there's been no monetary loss, you just say no monetary loss and continue with the complaint report. If, however, you're having trouble with the website, while we do prefer that folks use the website because we get the most detail that way, you can also dial in, and that's that number I did not have up, but let me say that now. It's 877-FTC-HELP or 877-382-4357. And if somebody asks you on that, when you call in or someone you know calls in, and if they ask about a loss, that should just be one question in a series, and you can still submit the complaint. I hope that's helpful.
Yes, that's great. You did great. I appreciate your time and energy, and like you said, and you're right, you and Melissa did a nice job combining the difference between the state and the federal. And so I want to thank you again, and we're going to get ready for our next presenter, who's been waiting patiently. Brian, I'm going to get you ready with there he is waiting with the flag and all. So can you move the next slide? Because I couldn't do that because I was muting Harris. But I've made you the presenter. There you go. So
terrific.
I'm going to mute myself, and I'm going to hand it over to you. And just so you know the time, we're going to break around 3:25, 3:30. Okay?
Sounds great.
Okay. Thank you. It's all you now.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, Melissa and Harris, for those terrific presentations. My name is Brian McDonough, and I am an assistant United States attorney. I am a federal prosecutor located in Cleveland, Ohio. I'm in our white collar crimes unit, and I'm the elder justice coordinator for my office, and it is a pleasure to be here today. I'd like to thank the Ohio Attorney General's Elder Abuse Commission. Thank you so much for having me. My goal is that what you hear today is going to save you $1,000 for you or a family member. So let me tell you a little bit more about the Department of Justice. This is the United States Department of Justice. We are headquartered in Washington, D.C. You might have heard the expression, you make a federal case about something. Well, all federal prosecutions are the responsibility of the Department of Justice, and those cases are handled by trial attorneys who either work out of our main headquarters, which we affectionately refer to as Main Justice, or by assistant U.S. attorneys located throughout the United States. The United States Department of Justice is headed by William Barr. He is the Attorney General for the United States, and ultimately all federal prosecutors answer to him. In Cleveland, on August 21st, 2017, Justin E. Herdman, he became the U.S. Attorney for our Northern District of Ohio. He was appointed by the President. He was also confirmed by the United States Senate. Prior to being U.S. Attorney for the Northern District, he was an attorney at the law firm of Jones Day. And prior to that, he also served as a federal prosecutor or assistant U.S. Attorney in Cleveland. There are approximately 93 U.S. Attorney's offices across the United States. We all have something in common, and that is we share the responsibility of enforcing federal law. So whether it takes place in Cleveland, Columbus, Cincinnati, or anywhere through the United States, all the United States Attorney's offices are prosecuting federal law. And when it comes to fighting elder fraud and elder abuse, the federal statutes do provide some robust sentencing features that really help in this fight against fraud and abuse. So I'll tell you a little bit about our district, the Northern District of Ohio. We cover the northern 40 districts, or the northern 40 counties in the state of Ohio, of the 88 counties. That covers approximately 6.5 million people. We're divided into two sections, or two divisions. Our Western Division, which is located in Toledo, and that's where we have a courthouse there that covers all the counties in blue in Western Ohio. We also have courthouses in our Eastern Division that cover Cleveland, Akron, and Youngstown. And in addition to where those courthouses are, we also have branch offices as well. We are headquartered in Cleveland. So let me tell you a little bit about the Department of Justice's the top priority, and that involves elder fraud and elder abuse as part of the Elder Justice Initiative. Can tell you that former Attorney General Jeff Sessions, he was the first to make the fight against elder abuse and elder fraud a top priority in the DOJ. And what he did was established in 2018 the role of Elder Justice Coordinator, and that's my role. And the rationale for creating this Elder Justice Initiative was really to assist people in reporting fraud and abuse. Once it's reported, it can be investigated and prosecuted. And since then, we've had millions of dollars in resources have been poured into investigating schemes that target older Americans, that deal with elder abuse and elder financial exploitation. Now, these fraud schemes can be domestic or they can be international, and we've seen them all over the globe. It's estimated that about 2 million people that are age 65 years or older have their IDs stolen every year. And over 13% of older Americans are the victim of some form of financial fraud every year. So how do we stop that? How do we combat that? Well, this is a great resource, the National Elder Fraud Hotline that was unveiled earlier. It's 1-833-FRAUD-11. And what this does is this is a free resource from the Department of Justice that if you are the victim of fraud, or you know someone who's the victim of fraud and are 60 years of age or older, you can call this number. And it is available from 6 a.m. to 11 p.m. And what it does is this. First of all, when you call the number, you're going to have it answered within 3 rings. So you're not going to have to wait. And then when it is answered, you're going to be assigned a case manager. And that case manager is going to treat you with respect and understanding. And what they're going to be able to do is refer you to the proper federal, state, and local resources for you and your particular situation. The great thing about combating elder fraud and elder abuse is that obviously we have federal and state and local. We have law enforcement. We also have wonderful community partners. So this is a good resource of, well, whom should I call? You can go ahead and call the elder fraud hotline on it. And again, why is this so important just to have this number? Well, we know that according to a study from New York, only 1 out of every 44 cases of financial abuse are ever reported. And older Americans that have some cognitive issues, they tend to suffer the greatest economic loss than others. And so my job as a federal prosecutor and as Elder Justice Coordinator for the Northern District of Ohio is to be part of the team to change that and to go ahead and to change those numbers on that. As we go through, I want to tell you about 5 popular scams that we see on the federal level. Romance scams, lottery scams, tech support scams, government imposter scams, and business email compromise scams. We see these, unfortunately, every single day, and our office investigates and prosecutes these cases every single day. The resources that we have in working with our federal, state, and local partners is we're using federal statutes such as wire fraud, if someone's using the phone, if someone's sending an email. We also use the mail fraud statute, so if anything gets sent in the mail. We also use the aggravated identity theft statute, so if someone is stealing your personal identifying information, your name, your date of birth, your social, in connection with a scam, we can go ahead and do that. The wonderful thing that we have is that while maybe not everything is a federal crime, we've got wonderful partners, state and local, and especially with the Ohio Attorney General's office, as Melissa mentioned, and the state investigating agency, BCI. Those agents do a wonderful job and assist in investigating state crimes and also referring those to county prosecutors' offices. There are 88 county prosecutor offices across the state. So with that 1-2 punch, whether it's federal, whether it's state, works out very well in the fight against these crimes. So let's talk about romance scams. If you think about it, how old were you when you fell in love? What were those feelings that you had in your brain falling in love? Well, if you're like millions of Americans, you use a dating site, a social networking site, or a chat room. And what the scammers will do is they will set up a fake profile to build an online relationship with the victim. And that relationship ends up with the scammer eventually convincing the victim to go ahead and to send money. And it could be in the form of cash, it could be gift cards, it could be Bitcoin or some other cryptocurrency. And just to give you an idea, back in 2018, the loss amount was $143 million for these online romance scams. What's interesting is they all have the same basic plan. Well, typically, they will target a widow who's looking for companionship, typically a single woman age 50 or older, and they will start off being pen pals. This will go on for months. They'll gain trust, and then all of a sudden, there will be some drama. Something will happen. They could be working on an oil rig somewhere out internationally, and then something happens. Or they're in China, and they suffer an injury. These online romance scammers are the unluckiest people around because they always end up asking for money, and that's the key. You know when you're being asked to send money that it's a scam, and to go ahead and notify law enforcement. And why is that important? Well, one view of it is that imagine that there's a fire. If your house was on fire, you'd call 911. There was a house in the neighborhood that's on fire. You would go ahead and you'd call 911 because it's in your neighborhood. If you, a friend or family member, all of a sudden they met someone online and they fell in love, and now they're sending money internationally or gift cards, this is where you have to go ahead and say, listen, this is a scam, okay? And again, as Harris said, they are so good. They are absolutely so good. And the only thing you can do is to encourage that friend, that family member, to cut off the communications with that online scammer. Now, talk about the lottery. For the lottery scam, just like the romance scam was unlucky, the lottery scam purports you to be incredibly lucky, that you've won the Irish sweepstakes, the Jamaican lottery, that you've won, and whether they call you or whether it's received in the mail or via email, they're all the same. The way you identify this scam is the upfront fee. If you win a lottery, you do not have to pay an upfront fee to go ahead and collect. Oh, and by the way, there's no such thing as a foreign lottery. Anything that occurs outside the U.S., it is a scam. Those are not legal. Other things they'll do is to say to collect your prize, don't tell family and friends, or send cash hidden in magazines or even a cereal box. That is a scam. And what happens is once someone falls for the scam, and again, the scammers are really, really good, that person's name ends up being on a list. And that list gets recirculated all throughout the scamming community. It could be on the dark web. And just because someone set money on one scam, all of a sudden the floodgates are going to go ahead and open, and they're going to get calls, and they're going to get emails and mail. So it really never ends, and there's all kinds of different spin-offs and variations regarding that. Next scam, that tech support scam, incredibly common. You get a phone call that there's a technician, they purport to be from Microsoft, and your computer has a virus. And this actually happened in my family where they changed cable providers, and what the scammer does in this situation is they ask you to give remote access to your computer to somebody else. And once you do that and the other person has control, they can do a number of things to your computer. And they can go ahead and look to steal your personal identifying information and commit a whole host of crimes like that. The next scam, the government imposter, this is like soup du jour at a restaurant because it changes, it seems like, every couple of months. The scammer claims to be from a government agency. It could be the IRS. It could be Social Security. It could be your local county sheriff. It could be someone claiming to be the jury duty commissioner. And all these scams have in common for the government imposter is that if you don't send money, you're going to get arrested or you're going to get a fine. You got to pay, and you got to pay now. You owe back taxes. You got to pay now. Well, guess what? Any like the IRS or Social Security or any of these agencies, you know it's a scam because if they're asking you to purchase gift cards and run up to your local grocery store or go to your local retail store to purchase gift cards and scratch off those codes, obviously that's a scam. And a lot of these, they tell you not to tell anyone. There, you know that's a scam. But what they're preying upon is that you'll get nervous, you fear arrest, you fear a fine, and sometimes they will actually keep you on the phone during the course of the scam to go ahead and make sure that's what you're doing. The last category here, the business email compromise scam. If you know someone who owns a business, this could be small, it could be large. If you know someone who's employed in a school district, at a school, at a hospital, at a nonprofit, any of these, These are organized crime groups, and we've seen these in West Africa. We've seen them in the Philippines, India, Malaysia, Costa Rica, throughout the world. Organized crime groups go ahead, and what they do, it's very clever. They are going to target the employee, and it's always an urgent request that employee needs to send funds, to wire funds for either an acquisition or a vendor payment, and to go ahead and do so, to go ahead and pay a bill. It's always something urgent on this. And these can reach into the millions of dollars when it comes to losses. So the folks that are committing this scam, that's what they're doing. And at the heart of the scam, the business email compromise relies on the oldest trick in the con artist handbook, and that is deception. In order to identify the scam, or what you have to do, never rely on the email alone. Always go ahead and verify via phone or some other way. Because what happens is the email that the person receives looks very similar to the actual email. That might be off by just a letter or something on that. And so you're always looking for another way of confirmation before making a payment to go ahead and to conquer this scam. And this scam reaches in the billions of dollars every year worldwide. And again, we have been successful in going after these folks. We have some resources, and you'll have a lot of those today from the Ohio Attorney General's office. What great work that they have done, as well as the Federal Trade Commission, when it comes to robocalls. Boy, I think I got a robocall during my portion of this presentation. They've done outstanding work to go ahead and reduce that, to go ahead and report that. And the best advice one could ever have to prevent financial elder exploitation is to make sure that folks don't talk to strangers. They don't talk to strangers. That will work out incredibly well. And to report it in the Better Business Bureau as well, to go ahead and report that. Our Department of Justice website, elderjustice.gov, again, provides additional resources for you regarding this. And hopefully, what I've shared with you today, some of those scams encourage you we take a two-prong approach, offense and defense. On offense, we're going out, we're investigating, we're prosecuting, we're extraditing these scammers from all over the globe to hold them accountable. But on the defensive side, what we're doing is doing outreach like this and education to share the word. Once you share the word, as Harris said, and educate those older Americans that you know and that you care about, reduces those scammers. So I'd like to thank the Ohio Attorney General's Elder Abuse Commission for having a chance to address you, and I look forward to working with our state and local partners to identify and prosecute those scammers.
Thank you, Brian. That was a great, and I think I'm going to ask April if you have any questions that anyone would like to ask Brian a question.
Yes. So you had spoken earlier that you covered the northern half of the state. What about the rest of the state?
Yes, there is a version of me that also covers the rest of the state, the Southern District of Ohio. In fact, there's a version of me in every one of those 93 districts across the state of Ohio. So it would simply be the United States Attorney's Office for the Southern District of Ohio, and his name is Andrew Malik. And Andrew is a civil prosecutor there and is an outstanding resource as well. So we will have you covered wherever you are in the great state of Ohio.
Sounds good. April, is there another question?
No, not at this time.
Okay. So again, Brian, thank you so much. I know that when I go to NAPSA, they make the National Adult Protective Services has been pushing APS to reach out to their elder justice coordinators. So if you can share, I have Andrew's contact information. So if anyone is interested, I'll make sure. So Brian has the North and Andrew has the South in Ohio. But you're welcome to contact the Attorney General of the Elder Justice Unit, and we can share that information with you. Because I think that's a great asset, is to be connected to the Elder Justice Initiative. We've come to the point, and we're going to take a break. we're going to give you a 10-minute break. So if everybody can come back please don't log off. I think it's easier just to stay connected and just walk away from your computer, mute your computer, walk away for 10 minutes or so, and we'll resume in about 10 minutes. So it will be 3:35 is when the program will continue. So thank you so much, and hopefully we keep getting those questions coming. Thank you. We're going to take a break now. Okay, everyone, welcome back. We're going to continue with our program as scheduled. So hopefully everybody had a chance to catch the breath, and we're going to continue. So our next speaker is David. And I want to remind everyone, we do have the question and answer. So as your speakers are talking and you think of a question, please go ahead and send it to us, because we're monitoring that. And if we get it to answer it today, we will. Otherwise, we're definitely going to answer your questions, and they'll be posted on our website. So David, you said you're ready, and in keeping with the program, I'm going to turn it over to you. You can go ahead and let folks know who you are and what you do for the Department of Commerce, and I believe you will have control of your own slides.
All right. Well, thank you, Sylvia. As she said, my name is David Beamel. I'm an enforcement attorney with the Ohio Department of Commerce Division of Securities. The Ohio Department of Commerce is the state's chief regulatory agency. We touch financial institutions, securities, unclaimed funds, liquor control, medical marijuana, and a host of other industries and businesses. It's a safe bet that if you own or operate a business, you probably have some interactions with the department. Hopefully they're all positive. But the Division of Securities itself, we really have a reasonably simple goal, and that's that we're looking to create an honest and fair securities market inside the state of Ohio. To do that, we try to balance the needs of businesses to raise money, capital formation, with investor protection. We recognize that businesses need funds to grow and to innovate and to hire employees. But at the same time, if they're going to be taking funds from Ohio investors, they need to disclose the appropriate information to those investors. What are the risks of the investment? Who owns the company? What's the financial status of the business? Is it making money or losing money? So we really do try to balance those two needs. And to do that, our mission, we administer and enforce the Ohio Securities Act. Ohio has had some form of an Ohio Securities Act since 1916, so 104 years at this point. And either the Division of Securities or a predecessor agency has been tasked with implementing and overseeing that act. So the division itself has three primary programs: enforcement, licensing, and registration. My experience over the last 5.5 years has been with enforcement, so I'll certainly be focusing on that today. But on the enforcement side, we conduct investigations into alleged violations of the Ohio Securities Act. So we interview victims, witnesses, investigation targets. We review bank records. We review investment account statements. In appropriate cases, we work with local law enforcement to execute search warrants. And then we take all that information that we have, we assess it, and we determine if, in our opinion, a violation has occurred. And if we think someone has broken the law, then we really have three avenues to resolve that: administrative, civil, and criminal. Through those processes. On the administrative side, we issue cease and desist orders. If someone has a license issued by the division, we can either revoke or suspend that license. Civilly, we can seek injunctive action. We can ask a court to appoint a receiver to run and wind down a business. And then kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, the heavier end is we do have criminal authority. So every violation of the Securities Act can be interpreted as a criminal act, as a crime. And what's interesting for our act is that we do not have any misdemeanors. So if you commit $1 of securities fraud, you've committed a 5th-degree felony. And if we do determine that criminal actions have occurred, we work with county prosecutors or the Attorney General's office to go to grand jury, get an indictment, and see those cases through to conviction and sentencing. Our licensing section accepts applications for individuals who want to be licensed as an investment advisor in the state of Ohio or a securities salesperson. They conduct pre-licensing examinations to make sure that those folks are appropriate to be licensed, that they don't have some sort of administrative or criminal background. And then the licensing section also runs our examination program. So we have 5 field examiners who travel across the state and conduct on-site compliance exams of investment advisors who are licensed by the division. They review client files, they look at the business's financial documents, they interview employees. And that really is kind of our first line of defense to ensure that those companies and those individuals are properly following the rules and regulations that we've set out. You know, those examinations can result in corrective action just through the post-examination process, but if the violations are severe enough, they can then refer it to enforcement for a full investigation. And then the third primary program is registration. So they're looking more at the products that are registered. So security broadly defined in Ohio law is a stock or a bond, promissory notes, and kind of investment products like that. And the general rule in Ohio is that if you want to sell a security, you have to register it with the division. There are a bunch of exceptions to that rule. So if the city of Toledo wants to issue municipal bonds to upgrade its water system, those would not have to be registered with us. Publicly traded companies, Apple, Facebook, Google, do not have to register with us. But smaller private placements have to submit to the division all of the documentation that they're going to give to prospective investors. And the registration section reviews that and makes sure that they're not actively lying in those documents, that they're providing full disclosures about, again, who owns the company, what are the risks, is the company in any sort of litigation, that sort of thing. And it's important to note that registration review process does not result in the division saying that something is a good or bad investment. We do not opine on the quality of an investment. We simply say that they have met the standards that they need to meet in terms of disclosure and transparency so that investors can make a wise investing decision themselves. And then lastly, we do have an administration section, which is our commissioner, chief legal, our outreach coordinator, and support staff. And they really make sure that the other 3 sections are all rowing in the same direction. So some quick statistics here. The ones I kind of want to focus on within enforcement are the indictments and the convictions. Again, we do have full criminal authority, although we work with the AG's office or county prosecutors to actually prosecute. As you can see in fiscal 19, we got 11 criminal indictments and 8 criminal convictions with almost $1.9 million in court-ordered restitution. What I would point out about the restitution is that money does not go to the division or to the state of Ohio. That money is given directly back to the victims in each particular case through the clerk of court's website. Sadly, in most of our criminal cases, the majority of the victims tend to be elderly, and quite a few of them often will have cognitive issues as well. As I know some of my co-presenters have mentioned already, it goes without saying that someone who is 70 is more likely to have more money saved up than someone who is 30, and that bears out in terms of who our victims tend to be. And then you can also see we licensed 210,000 professionals and registered 8,000 products for sale in Ohio. So looking a little more closely at the enforcement side of things, the Ohio Securities Act is found within 170701 of the revised code, and enforcement is created. We officially are the Office of the Attorney Inspector, and we are a criminal justice authority, or criminal justice agency, excuse me. So we have access to certain law enforcement databases that are operated by the AG's office or by other agencies, and that just kind of gives us more fulsome information in terms of running our investigations. Our enforcement powers are laid out in Section 23. We can open an investigation for essentially any reason as long as it appears to us that it's appropriate. So most of our investigations begin because a victim files a complaint or a close family member files a complaint. But for those of you who are on the call today, if you're working with an elderly client or customer and you have reason to believe that they may be being financially exploited, you can also make a referral to us. We will conduct a triage investigation to ensure that we do indeed have jurisdiction and that it involves a security in some manner. And if that's the case, then we can open up a full investigation and take things from there. Unique among commerce divisions is that we do have subpoena authority on our own accord. So we can issue subpoenas to any business or individual in the state of Ohio that may have information that we believe would assist us in determining if violations of the act have occurred. So typically that involves bank records and investment firms to get account statements, but we've subpoenaed title companies to get mortgage information. We've looked at car loans, things like that. We've even subpoenaed other government agencies before if they've had information that we think we need. And then we typically do issue subpoenas to the investigation target, and we have them come in and sit down, and we swear them in and interview them for several hours, and just try to get to the bottom of things and determine what their state of mind was, what they were trying to do, and whether or not they did indeed violate the law. The Prohibited Acts section is everything you're not allowed to do under the Securities Act. So this is everything from providing investment advice if you don't have a license, through to fraud by omission if you fail to tell an investor an important or material piece of information, false representations. So if I'm selling a security and I tell the investor that, hey, we're making money hand over fist, when in fact I know that we're actually losing money and we're close to bankruptcy, that would be a clear false representation about a material fact, and that would be a violation of the Act. Two interesting provisions we have talk about creating and publishing false or fraudulent statements or reports about the value of a security. So by way of example, about a year ago, I had a case that finished up over in Montgomery County. The defendant, it was a criminal case, the defendant, over the course of 10 years, had issued at least 150 fake account statements to a select group of his clients. He had very carefully chosen these clients. They were all elderly. Most of them had diminished mental capacity issues. One of them, while he was taking money from her account, she was in a dementia ward at her nursing home. But these fake statements, he told his clients that, you'll get account statements from my company, but they're complicated, they're written by lawyers, you won't understand them. So I will send you streamlined account statements every month, and you should just look at those, and the ones that the company sends, just throw them out, don't worry about them. So the fake statements grossly inflated the amount of money that these individuals had in their accounts. There was a married couple in Eastern Ohio that they each got these fake statements. The husband's account statements, the fake ones, indicated that he had more than $2 million in his investment brokerage accounts. He actually had less than $20,000. But because he believed his investment advisor, he lived his life as if he had $2 million to live on. He was an 81-year-old guy who had millions of dollars. So he took his family out to lunch and dinners and went on nice vacations, bought new cars. And the way the defendant did this was when the guy needed money, he would transfer money from a different client's account so that the request for funds never bounced. We worked with the Montgomery County Prosecutor's Office, recommended about 150 felonies, one for each of these fake statements. And we ended up indicting him on about 130 of those, and he pled guilty last spring in 2019 and is currently serving time in a state facility. So that really is kind of a powerful act, because I think a lot of people don't realize that each of those fake statements is actually a different charge. And then lastly, our Penalties Act is just the section that spells out when we get from a 5th degree felony to a 4th degree to a 3rd degree. Again, $1 of securities fraud is a 5th degree felony. And we actually hit a 1st degree felony, the highest felony level, at $150,000. And that is an incredibly low dollar amount threshold when you compare it to the theft statute, which requires $1.5 million worth of theft. And I think the main reason for that difference is the relationship of trust between an investor and a client and their investment advisor. Clients are trusting their advisors to steward their money over the course of 20 or 30 years or more so that they can retire. Moving on to education and outreach, we do have a full-time education and outreach manager, Dan Orzano, who's on the call today. Dan really oversees quite a number of programs. As you can see here, he and I, along with our colleague John Christ, are co-chairing the Ohio Securities Conference, which is an annual conference that the division has hosted for at least the last 40 years that I'm aware of. Dan also edits and publishes the Ohio Securities Bulletin, which is a quarterly publication by the division. It's online, it's free, You just need to submit your email address if anyone would like to receive it. It is geared more towards industry professionals, but we do put summaries of criminal cases and administrative actions, so it is a good way as well to keep up to date on kind of the schemes and the frauds that we're seeing. And as you can see in FY19, Dan and other division employees spoke at 34 outreach events and connected with almost 5,000 Ohioans. Certainly, we like getting out of the office and we like speaking to groups, so if any of your organizations would like to have someone present, certainly reach out and we'd be happy to make that work. We work with a lot of partnerships. Financial fraud these days does not care about state borders or international borders for that matter. With the internet and texting and long distance phone calls, it's easy to be in Arizona and defraud Ohioans. So we work with the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission, the Financial Industry Regulatory Authority, FINRA, the FBI, U.S. Postal Inspection. I think we've worked with both of the U.S. Attorney's offices in Ohio, Northern and Southern districts. At the state level, the Attorney General's office represents us in administrative hearings and certain criminal hearings. The Ohio Department of Insurance, many securities professionals are also insurance agents. So we run parallel investigations pretty regularly with the Ohio Department of Insurance. And then again, other state securities agencies, sometimes we need the Texas State Securities Board to issue a subpoena to a Texas bank for us. Or, we've had the Utah Securities Division interview a victim who lives out in Salt Lake City. So it really is kind of an all hands on deck in terms of our fellow securities agencies. And then again, on the local side, local law enforcement and prosecutors are critical for us when it comes to our criminal cases. We work very closely with local law enforcement and prosecutors across all 88 counties. Some quick division resources here. If you go to our website, there are some tabs across the top. Probably the most important one for this group is the investors and public. If you hover over that, the drop-down has at least 25 different pamphlets and brochures that we've uploaded. How to become an informed investor, things you should check into before you invest, red flags to look out for, how to spot a con man, affinity fraud, and quite a bit more. The important one under industry professionals is that all division licensees are now mandatory reporters for suspected elder abuse and financial exploitation as of about 15 months ago. So we're obviously doing everything we can to educate our licensees and make sure that they're aware of those obligations. And then we do publish the Ohio Investment Advisor Handbook, which is more of an industry handbook, but it does provide some good baseline information for the public in terms of what obligations investment advisors are under, what compliance they need to engage in, and so forth. And then lastly, some non-division resources. We are a member of NASA, the North American Securities Administrators Association, which has members of all 50 states, as well as most of the Canadian provinces, Mexico, Curacao, Jamaica, and other nations, their securities agencies. NASA has several good online postings on things that people who are nearing retirement should consider, what folks who are in retirement should consider. They post investor advisories, so you can find out kind of what scams are popping up in other states, because you can guarantee they're showing up in California, they're going to make it to Ohio eventually. BrokerCheck is an online database that's run by FINRA. It is free, and it contains the disciplinary and employment history and licensing history of every licensed stockbroker and investment advisor in the country. So if you're working with an elderly client or a customer, and they're talking about their new financial advisor and something seems fishy to you, if you can get that individual's name, you can look them up again for free in BrokerCheck, and it'll give you their entire background, assuming they either are or at some point were licensed. And you can just kind of have a better idea on if that person is on the up and up, or if there is something that you may need to report to the division or to a different agency. And then lastly, investor.gov is a website that's run by the U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission. Like NASA's website, investor.gov has a lot of good information for investors, for advocates, for guardians, things that should be considered when changing investment advisors, red flags to watch out for, new cons and schemes to be aware of. So it really is a wealth of information. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
David, there are no questions at this time.
Great. Well, thank you so much, everyone. I appreciate your attention.
All right, thanks everyone. Hopefully everyone can hear me. My name is Natasha Petricola, and currently I'm the Deputy Administrator of Community Programs with Cuyahoga County Division of Senior and Adult Services. Two of the three programs that I specifically work with directly involve adult protective services. One is our actual adult protective services program, and the other one is our centralized intake, which receives the calls from the community when people would like to make a report alleging abuse, neglect, or exploitation. I'm also currently the OCAP's board chair, so I have a lot of contact with counties throughout the state that also work in the realm of adult protective services, and we share resources oftentimes and tips and strategies when we're working with clientele. So a lot of what I'm going to speak on today is kind of our response in Cuyahoga County to exploitation, but it also is a general overview of what is expected of all adult protective services programs across the state. Could you advance my slide, Sylvia, please? So here's the polling question. Everybody can read it and take a vote. But basically the question states, APS has jurisdiction to investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, and exploitation of adults who are under the age of 60 years of old. Is this statement true or false? So I'll give people a little bit of time to answer that, and then we can see what the results are. And then I'd like to move to the next slide so I can kind of continue with the presentation. I know we're running a little tight on time, and I want to make sure everybody has the ability to speak on. I see that there's one false coming through that at least got notified to me. So let's.
Yeah, there's about, right now you've got about half the folks answering,
Okay.
and you do have some people indicating true. So I know your next slide.
Slide will be timely then.
Yeah, so I'm going to go ahead and move to the next slide because you're right, we're running out of, so if people can, I'm going to go ahead to the next one.
Okay.
Okay, for some reason, closed the poll.
All right, so here's actually the very first bullet point, the answer to that last poll question. In the state of Ohio, per the Ohio Revised Code, if you look this up, you would see that investigations can consist of those adults over the age of 60. There are some counties that also do investigate under 60, but in those particular cases, those investigations are voluntary. The person under 60, unless we have an order that states their capacity concerns and we're looking to file a motion for guardianship, those adults have to agree to the APS investigation. So adults have to be 60 and older in the state of Ohio. There must be an impairment or a disability. Now that impairment is obviously a functional impairment, or it could be a mental or cognitive impairment. It could be a combination of both because we have many cases that come in with multiple impairments. There must be an allegation of abuse, neglect, self-neglect, or exploitation, and the person must reside in the community. Ohio is about one of 3 states that does not have jurisdiction in licensed nursing homes, so we cannot go investigate allegations of abuse, neglect, self-neglect, or exploitation in a nursing home setting that's licensed. Just some key things I want everyone to keep in mind as I kind of go through my presentation is that adults who are abused have a 300% higher risk of death when compared to those who have not been subjected to any type of mistreatment. We know that in 60% of elder abuse cases, perpetrators are often family, predominantly spouses and children, but we also see nieces, nephews, grandchildren. It doesn't discriminate when it comes to some families where there's a lot of drama. And while likely underreported, elder exploitation ends up costing Americans over $36.5 billion per year. And those are numbers that we speculate. We really don't know how far and deep this really reaches. Next slide. So I want to talk briefly about the APS COVID-19 response. The directive has always been from the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, who serves as the governing body over adult protective service programs in the state of Ohio for all 88 counties, that we continue to meet the state mandate of conducting a face-to-face home visit within 72 hours for non-emergency clients and 24 hours for emergency cases within receipt of the report. When reports are accepted where clients are hospitalized or in skilled nursing facilities, what we found is specifically in our county, and also talking to a lot of my counterparts, they've gone through the same issues that we have across the state, that we oftentimes are having to call the professionals in these facilities. When somebody's hospitalized, it's often the social worker, nurse, or doctor, whoever will speak to us about the patient's care. And in the skilled facilities where we have people temporarily getting skilled care, but the intent is for them to return to the community, we've really talked to the social workers and those professionals as well to coordinate care, because in-person meetings have become pretty much impossible at this point in time. We've noticed a little bit loosening up of restrictions, but we're still not able to make a visit in a lot of these settings. For existing stable clients in cases that were closed where we feel that the service plans have been met, staff were expected to contact the client by phone, to contact family members or any other collateral contacts that are closely involved with that client to kind of let them know what is going on. But for those stable clients, we've done a lot of phone triaging. For non-validated reports, those were to be closed via phone call, and we continue to send the closing letter to our clients. We are utilizing Zoom meetings for court hearings in our county that involves our protective service orders and our guardianship hearings. In Cuyahoga County, we have a great relationship with our courts, with our magistrates and our judges, and we've seen virtually no delay whatsoever with our protective service order hearings. Guardianships are taking a little longer, but as most of you can imagine, it's because of the guardianship process. You know, that is the most restrictive of one of the interventions we can take, and you really want to ensure that everybody has their day in court when we do pursue a guardianship. And then we continue to have reports taken from our online tool. Currently in Cuyahoga County, we do have a web portal. It's still very popular amongst referral sites. What we do notice, though, is there's been some decreases in our reports, and predominantly a lot of our cases are called in by medical professionals, social workers, people from nursing home settings where people are AMA and unsuccessfully discharged, or there's concerns after skilled care where services aren't put in place, that things may go wrong once a client returns to the community. So we're still going strong as far as all fronts related to receiving reports from people in the community. Next slide. So I want to talk about, since the bulk of this presentation deals with financial exploitation and scams, what the law states in the state of Ohio as the definition of financial exploitation. So if you read along with this slide, it's the unlawful or improper act of a person using in one or more transactions an adult or an adult's resources for monetary or personal benefit, profit, or gain when that person obtained or exerted control over the adult's resources in any one of the following ways. Now, if you notice in that little paragraph I just read, the person is asterisked and it's written in blue. The reason being is that in September of 2018, the law was changed, and prior to that it said caretaker. So if you could imagine, a lot of times when we were investigating cases and APS would go in there and ask somebody if they were a caretaker and the exploiter, the natural response would be, I'm not the caretaker of this individual. So what we've done is the law has been broadened to entail persons, which can be any type of relationship. It could be a family member. It could be somebody providing care for pay or not pay. It could be a neighbor, a church friend, a stranger who has somehow infiltrated this older adult's life. So the following ways that exploitation can occur: it can occur without the adult's consent or the consent of the person authorized to give consent on the adult's behalf, so a power of attorney or a guardian. It can mean beyond the scope of the expressed or implied consent of the adult or the person authorized to give consent on the adult's behalf. Many times we have clients that we see who give somebody money for a purpose. You know, the purpose is, I'm giving you this amount of money to pay my utility bills, and then a few months later they find their utilities are all being disconnected because that person they trusted to pay those bills has taken that money and not used it for the right purpose. So it can be done through deception, by threats, and by intimidation. Next slide. So a few indicators of exploitation that we kind of look out for, and there's many, and they always seem to change. Abrupt changes in a will or other financial documents. Oftentimes we see new friends come into older adults' lives, people that they've befriended in different kinds of situations or scenarios. We even have strangers sometimes who come into our clients' lives. They're a handyman, there's somebody in the neighborhood, somebody they met at the bus stop. But these people come in and then they develop some type of relationship or familiarity with the adult, and before you know it, they're starting to gain access to different funds or resources they may have. We also see oftentimes unexplained disappearance of funds or valuable possessions. This is a generation that it doesn't always mean cash in hand. A lot of our older adults collected coins or have gold or other valuables that are actually worth a lot of money, and those can show up void of the home of that older adult. Bills are unpaid despite the availability of adequate financial resources. You know, if somebody has enough money to live comfortably off of their retirement, their pension, their Social Security, and now suddenly they can't pay for food or medications or their utility bills, it does raise a red flag about where those resources are being diverted. Oftentimes we see people actually forge the elder's signature on financial transactions, titles of his or her possession, whether they're houses or cars. And sometimes we even see that somebody brings a credit card application or refinancing of a home that's been sold off for 30 years. And this older adult signs something without the true knowledge of what they're getting themselves into. And oftentimes we see uninvolved relatives claiming the rights to an elder's affairs and possessions. We even have family members who've been put in wills and are owed upon the death of that particular older adult the savings or the home, and they become greedy and take advantage of that older adult before they even pass. And obviously you can think of if you have an older adult who eventually needs care in a facility, and if you start to look back at their resources and you find that they had a lot of money at one point in time and now this money has disappeared with no explanation of where it's gone, it can create serious dilemmas for that older adult if they need to be put in a long-term care facility. Next slide. So APS court interventions. The law of the state of Ohio has been amended several times, and I must say every time it's amended, it's in a positive direction. So we haven't seen us step backwards in the world of adult protective services. We've made leaps and bounds, and we continue to grow where we are improving the services we deliver as adult protective programs, and also about our ability to intervene and intercede when we do suspect there's something really wrong going on with our older adult, whether it's through neglect, abuse, or exploitation. So 5101.69 of the Ohio Revised Code allows for temporary restraining orders for a person who might be interfering with provisions of adult protective services to to basically butt out of the case. You know, we step in and we can take a court order and we can ensure that we no longer receive some type of static from the person, often the perpetrator, trying to infiltrate the investigation. So when we suspect that there's been some type of criminal exploitation, Adult Protective Services with the law change can actually reach out to law enforcement and has the ability to file temporary restraining orders. The Act basically requires a Department of Job and Family Services APS worker or the designee to notify a local law enforcement agency if it has reasonable cause to believe that the subject of a report of abuse, neglect, or exploitation of an older adult of an investigation of such report has been criminally exploited. So during the local law enforcement agency's investigation of criminal exploitation, our county prosecutors may file a petition in court for a temporary restraining order against any person, including the alleged victim, who denies or obstructs access to the older adult's residence. The court must issue the temporary restraining order if it finds there is reasonable cause to believe that the older adult is being or has been abused, neglected, or exploited, and access to the older adult's residence has been denied or obstructed. So the Act establishes that such a finding by the court is evidence that immediate and irreparable injury, loss, or damage will result, so notice is required. And after obtaining the temporary restraining order, a representative of law enforcement agency may accompany us, APS, into the home, and then we are able to also obstruct anybody from continuing to use accounts of that older adult where we have enough evidence to present to the court that there is exploitation occurring. So everything with Adult Protective Services obviously involves the investigation and collecting the evidence that we would take to our judges and our magistrate to get the protective service orders issued and the restraining orders issued. Next slide. This is just more information about APS court intervention. Really what I just kind of summarized, this talks about the time frames. There are 3 different kinds of protective service orders, for example. We have an ex parte one that is done immediately, telephonically, oftentimes, where there is no notice of a court hearing being scheduled. The court hearing happens after the fact, but those are where we feel there's imminent risk to an older adult. If we don't act immediately, they could possibly die. The other 2 are more common. There's an emergency protective service order, which is granted. There is a court hearing usually within 5 days, and it's good for 14 days with one 14-day extension for us to really look at what's happening with the case and also intervene as a decision maker if necessary. The last one is a general protective service order, which is the longest lasting one. That one is good for up to 6 months. It often takes 10 business days to have a court hearing scheduled. And what we find in those cases are we have some time to work and really dig deep into the situation and learn what's happening. There's no imminent risk of something needing to be dealt with immediately, but it gives APS some time to put a care plan in place and really look at what we can do to either alleviate completely or remediate somehow the abuse that's occurring with that older adult. Next slide. So immunity for reporting, I just want to stress that any person who has reasonable cause to believe an adult is suffering abuse, neglect, or exploitation and makes that report responsibly is immune from civil or criminal liability unless that person is acting in bad faith or with malicious purpose. The majority, again, of our referrals come from professionals. Professionals really are doing what they feel is best in that case to look out for their client or their patient. We do have some families with a lot of drama that follows them, but you know we work through that through our investigation to ensure that whatever is happening, whether it's legitimate or not, we kind of focus in on the client, and if something is going on, we'll look into it. Also, what's important to understand is that in 2018, they also listed 2 mandatory reporters in the state of Ohio, several people in the financial world. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that we are seeing rising numbers in exploitations. So previously, who were not included in the mandated reporters but became mandated reporters in September of 2018 were real estate brokers. If you think about that, those are individuals who might see some changes in titles or deeds of a home and maybe some sales that are not appropriate. Notary publics, savings and loans, credit unions and bank employees, investment advisors, and financial planners. CPAs were already included into mandated reporters, and so were attorneys, but it was nice to see the addition to some of these other financial industry professionals into the mandated reporter doors. Next slide, please. So an APS risk assessment, when we conduct an investigation, APS is looking to see if there are any kind of changes of mental status or memory impairments, cognitive deficits, issues with orientation to person, place, or time. We assess the client's physical status, their ADLs and IADLs. We look at if there's dependencies on others. The risk factors as far as their support system. Do they have a support system? Is their support system part of the problem? Illness, financial status, decision makers. One thing about adult protective services that really doesn't discriminate across races or people's gender or people's financial situation. We see people with lots of money and people with very minimal financial well-being that get exploited equally. The social worker interviews people who are also involved with the adults. We might find some resources and people able to help in the situation. We also may find out more information about what's really occurring in that person's life. And the social worker reviews bills, banking records, medical needs, things that can give us more insight about what is happening with our client. Next slide. This is one of the forms that we use internally in Cuyahoga County. I know that some other counties have asked about what we do when we're involved with exploitation cases, and we've shared this as well with our partners. And this is also located in the packet that Sylvia provided. That basically, if you'd like to replicate this in some way or use it in the future, please feel free to do if you're working in adult protective services or in a venue where you have to assess whether or not somebody might be financially exploited and then have to make a report to somebody like an APS program. But this is just a nice checklist that looks just about observations. It tells you kind of a reminder of what are some of the things we need to be on the lookout for when financial exploitation may be involved. Next slide. Dr. Factora follows me actually after my presentation, and I know he's going to talk quite a bit about capacity, but this is the law as it states, and I know that you all will be provided a PowerPoint following this presentation today, but if you want to reference it in the future, and I always tell people the main thing that you need to remember when you're dealing with APS is there's a difference between capacity and competency. So this kind of summarizes the capacity is an understanding to make and carry out reasonable decisions concerning the person's self or resources, with or without the assistance of a caretaker. So reasonable decisions are often decisions that we make in daily life that basically facilitate for our provisions of food, shelter, clothing, and healthcare, and just for basic everyday kind of activities that we do. When people have capacity issues, it's something that is determined by a medical professional. That's that statement of expert evaluation you often hear adult protective services speak about, where a doctor actually determines through various tests and the mental status exam. There's a clocks test. There's the slums that some use and various geriatric programs that actually measure what is going on with the person's ability to make decisions. Next slide. General capacity, what we look for basically is awareness of the situation, a factual understanding of issues. Can people understand what we're talking to them about? The appreciation of likely consequences, the ability to manipulate simple information, the ability to function in one's own environment, at least with minimal interference, and the extent of demands on a client. Mini mental is just not enough at times. Next slide. So in APS, we often have 4 types of scenarios or outcomes. We have capacity, where somebody's willing to accept services. We have capacity where people are not willing to accept services, often are self-neglect cases. Often the people that we're seeing scammed by romance scams, grandparent scams, they really want to believe they've developed some kind of connection with this person that's taking advantage of them. We have those individuals who have a lack of capacity, so they're incapacitated and willing to accept services, and those that are incapacitated and not willing to accept services. Next slide. This is the definition of incompetence. So this is a court-determined this is where somebody's so mentally impaired as a result of a mental or physical illness or disability or some type of mental starvation or the chronic result of substance abuse, if the person is incapable of taking proper care of themselves, their property, or fails to provide for the person's family or other persons from whom a person is charged by law to provide. So competency is something handled in our court, where we go to probate court, and oftentimes we petition for a guardian for that individual. Next slide.
The next slide is to see if we have any questions for you. So April or Monica, do we have any questions for Natasha?
We actually do have quite a few questions, but I'm thinking that Dr. Factora might answer a few of them. So if you just want to go ahead and push through. And any that we don't answer right now will be answered after this webinar, correct?
Yes, we're going to do our best to post. So the questions will be posted on our, along with the handouts, the PowerPoint. We also have a booklet of resources for investigating exploitation cases. So we will email you when everything is posted, so you can have access to the resources. So Dr. Factora, I am going to make you the presenter. Now, I know that we're running late, so, and I know you have a lot to say. So I'm going to tell you to go ahead and go through your slides, because if people, I think people are going to want to hear what you have to say, so I don't want you to shortchange yourself. So I've made you a presenter. At least I thought I did, unless I was talking too much.
I've got it, Judith. No problem.
Okay. So I just want to say, I've known Dr. Factora personally now for many years. And I met him when I was at Cuyahoga County with Adult Protective Services. And so I got to know him as a clinician and his interest in elder abuse, where he's actually on Cuyahoga County's I-team, the interdisciplinary team. He's also a member of our commission. So I know that as a professional, he's very vested in the area of elder abuse. But I know we've shared multiple conversations about capacity. So I've asked him to give us a quick overview, because capacity is such a big part of whether someone goes forward criminally with a criminal case or civilly, that we spent a little bit of time understanding capacity a little bit better. So with that, Dr. Factora, I'm going to flip it to you.
No problem. So thanks for having me here. Sylvia and the Elder Abuse Commission, it's always a pleasure to talk about this particular topic. So we do have one polling question. The question is, 20% of adults over the age of 85 have some type of dementia diagnosis. Is this true or false? So I don't know if I'm just going to wait. Do I just advance the slide? How does that work? I'm just waiting for the answers. There we go.
Interesting, because you have a mixed bag. So half the people are telling me this is true, and the other half are telling me it's false. But I have a feeling you can give us the right answer.
So the answer is actually false. The percentage of people over the age of 85 is much higher than 20%. So I'm actually 35% or more. And the prevalence of dementia does increase with age. So this becomes a big issue for folks who are older. It's not that you expect it, but there is cognitive impairment. So, thinking about a geriatrician.
We got it.
Geriatricians actually work with people over the age of 65, and everyone has a sense of what they'd expect when they get older. Now, our goal is to preserve function, preserve independence, keep a person in the community, keep them out of the nursing home, so to speak. So there are a lot of things that we focus on as geriatricians, and this slide gives us a framework of kind of the things that we think about. The 4 M's actually are one way to kind of categorize the important aspects of normal aging that you want to focus on. Yes, the 1 M is mentation. So maintaining your cognitive health, maintaining your brain health, looking for any threats to it that could be managed, like depression or medication problems. And then you're trying to find ways to address those issues with community services and other resources if necessary. The other M is mobility. People who are over the age of 65 are at higher risk for falls. So trying to identify risk factors for falls like arthritis, vision problems, balance difficulties, and also medications to reduce the risk of falls, and then the fracture is something that we also try to avoid. Now, the medications I've mentioned a while ago is one of the things that we encounter that can be problematic in people over the age of 65. Often people who are older will have multiple medical problems, and they'll prescribe multiple medications for those medical problems. And beyond the stuff that's prescribed, people will take over-the-counter medications, herbal supplements, and all of these can cause issues, problems, side effects, and they can affect cognition, they can affect mobility, they can affect other things. So trying to pare down the medications to the minimum effective medications and necessary medications are one of those things that we do as geriatricians as well. And then the last thing is the M of what matters most. And this really reflects the heterogeneity of people over the age of 65. People's goals when they get older vary. And it's no longer just about matching a medical plan or a medication to a medical problem. It's really more about what is that going to achieve for this particular individual. Does this person really want to live all the way to 85, 95, 105? Are they focusing more on making sure that they preserve their function, preserve their independence, or are they focusing more on focusing on quality of life and making sure that they're pain-free and that they're enjoying life? And when you're younger, these things kind of overlap, but as you get older, they separate. So having a frank discussion about that with my patients also helps to focus our interventions to make sure that whatever we're doing is reflected and it helps to achieve the goal of that particular individual. Now, that being said, there are a number of things that we look for in folks who are older, and we know that cognition does decline. Did I skip another slide? Good. So when we do the geriatric assessment, we are really looking for ways to preserve function, and we look at threats to that. And it can be something that's cognitive, like depression or delirium or dementia. It could be a physical impairment, as we mentioned a while ago, due to arthritis or medication side effects, but then also look to see, is that person supported well in their home or in the community? Because there are ways to help to maintain a person in their residence by looking at all of these factors. So we, as a geriatrician, we make sure that these medical issues are clarified. We know exactly what medical problems that person has that could be a threat to their independence. We try to optimize them best possible because as you get older, you're not really looking for a cure to diabetes or a cure to heart failure or a cure to the stroke. We're trying to find a way to minimize the impact on the person's function and independence. Is there a way to actually reverse some of that impairment, regain some of that function and independence? And if we can only optimize them so much, what sort of supports are available to support them at home, to maintain their independence so that the person can really age in place? Now, I had thrown up the slide earlier of cognitive decline that occurs with normal aging. This is an important thing to keep in mind because even before a person develops dementia, normal aging can start to affect cognition. And we'll talk about the impacts of this later on when we talk about capacity evaluations. You can already start to have changes in cognition as a result of normal aging that can affect a person's ability to make financial decisions. In fact, once you get to an area of a cognitive impairment called mild cognitive impairment, which means that a person doesn't do well on cognitive testing, but they're still able to be independent of their activities of daily living, that level of impairment is already associated with a higher risk of taking risks, an impairment in a person's understanding of complex financial decisions. So those persons are already at risk for things like scams and fraud, regardless of whether or not they have dementia. So those are things that we kind of keep in mind, along with other syndromes that can affect a person as they get older. So we're looking for things like unexplained weight loss or malnutrition. And we look for deconditioning, problems with walking, with balance. We examine the medications to see if there's anything problematic about the medications the person is taking. Urinary incontinence can also affect the person's quality of life. Multiple trips to the bathroom at night can also be associated with high risk of falls. Persons with pain also can affect quality of life. It can affect their mobility. And all of these together, when you have decreased mobility or reduction in muscle mass as a result of malnutrition, can produce frailty, which is a condition that's associated with slower movements, slower strength, and reduction in endurance. And frailty itself as a syndrome is associated with poor outcomes with regards to surgery, with regards to longevity. So that's sort of like the last geriatric syndrome that we want to try to avoid by addressing all these kind of precursors. And all these lead to impairments in function, and then of course can lead to problems with cognition as resulting in depression, delirium, and dementia. So these are all the things that we kind of look for as threats that can be associated with normal aging. You shouldn't expect them with normal aging, but the more of these syndromes a person has, the greater risk that person has for functional impairment and for dependence on other people. So this kind of framework is important when we're thinking about evaluations for folks who are older, particularly when they're not really able to reside on their own, they're requiring more assistance from others, or they're making decisions that are actually poor and may require community intervention. So, as Natasha had mentioned a while ago, the issue of competence versus capacity really comes to these questions of self-neglect or neglect. And just to be clear again, competence is a legal term. A person can only be considered incompetent by a judge. Physicians, clinicians can't do that. What we do is we actually declare that a person does or does not have capacity to make decisions for themselves. And we're thinking more in a general sense in the context of statements of expert evaluation. So I'll talk about the capacity evaluation and the things that we kind of do. In the state of Ohio, a licensed physician, a clinical psychologist can determine whether or not a person has decision-making capacity. And that type of capacity, there's several that actually exist. But in the context of financial exploitation, we're talking about financial decision-making capacity. But then for the issues of statements of expert evaluation, we're talking about the ability to make medical decisions for themselves, and also with regards to the ability to make financial decisions for themselves. Those are very explicit statements that we have to make judgments on in that form. When we do the assessment for capacity, aside from cognitive testing, we also have to understand just understand a person's rationale for the decisions that they make. As Natasha had mentioned earlier, a person really has to understand their situation. If they're living at home by themselves and they're not able to do certain things, do they understand what their limitations are? And then if that's the case, do they have an understanding of what their needs are? And can they actually arrange for these needs to be met by accessing community services, accessing family, accessing friends? And if they aren't able to access them, do they have a plan for how they would address that issue? We also talk about safety scenarios at home. If there was an emergency at home, if they fell down, if they needed to call someone to help to put out a fire or EMS, how would they address that issue? If they couldn't get to the phone, what would they do? And these are all questions that help to reflect that person's understanding and their judgment of how they would address that situation. This is really more beyond just the cognitive testing overall. And it's important with regards to assessing that person's ability to arrange for these services in the future. So the framework for capacity evaluations revolves around an understanding of all the information that's relevant about maybe from a medical standpoint, from prognostic tests, but also with regards to a person's situation at home. Do they understand their situation, the gaps in their care, what sort of things do they need help with, and then their decision to access or to accept these services to meet those needs. Do those decisions really reflect their values, their whole kind of approach to their life, or is there some element of it that's missing that doesn't show an understanding? And that logic, that reasoning has to be present, so that person has to be able to explain themselves, communicate their choice either verbally or in a written fashion. And even if we don't necessarily agree with their decision, there has to be some reasoning behind it. And this is where the capacity evaluation does have some variability. As a clinician, you have to accept that there is reasoning behind it, and the reasoning is sound despite the fact that you may not agree with it. And that kind of assessment varies from clinician to clinician. So beyond this, we really have to assess whether or not that person has functional impairment. We talked about functional impairment a while ago. The basic activities of daily living, instrumental activities of daily living, and even the advanced stuff like being able to work and being able to do your leisure activities, being able to be active in community activities. That person has to understand that there's actually an impairment. Do they recognize that their memory problems or their mobility problems interfere with their functional status? Is it because of a cognitive issue that they're not able to do these things? Is it because of a physical issue that they can't do these things? Is it a sensory issue? So not only is it important to identify that there's an impairment in activities of daily living, we have to recognize what is the cause of it. And it can be one, it can be multiple. And it's important because some of these things can be addressed. If a person has cataracts and they're unable to drive, you can fix the cataracts. If a person has arthritis and they're not able to move around very well, you can give them pain medications and they may be able to move around a lot better and be able to do more. If they have cognitive impairment, is it something that's reversible? Now, is it treatable like depression? Is it delirium that can be that is reversible, or is it a progressive dementia-related illness? And then, that whatever we are able to elicit from that individual, what their observations are and their rationale, we typically use as a comparison someone else's observations of what is going on. So this is where we rely on caregivers, on community services, on friends, on family to tell us what is going on with a person that they see, what are the flaws that they see in that person's decision-making, and what is the explanation behind it. And we try to put the two together and see that do they correlate, and if there's a gap, what is the reason? And it often relates to the impairment cause. And in many circumstances, from what I evaluate, it's due to cognitive impairment. So the details regarding the explanations, that's really where the determination for capacity really takes place. We do the evaluation for cognitive testing using the mini mental state examination or the St. Louis University mental status questionnaire, that's the SLUMS, or the MOCA. But all that gives you is an idea that there is cognitive impairment present. That's really not enough to determine whether or not a person has capacity or not. You have to really solicit from that individual whether or not they understand that there's impairment present, whether or not they understand that there's impairment in their activities of daily living, and then an investigation as to whether or not they really can give you an explanation of why that impairment is present and what are they going to do about it, and then tell you what the plan is going to be. And then the judgment comes afterwards from the standpoint of the clinician is, do they make a reasonable explanation for why they can't do these things? And do they give you a reasonable explanation or a plan for what are they going to do about it? And that's that insight and that judgment that is really necessary to aid the clinician in determining whether or not that person has decision-making capacity. And you have to get all of that from the interview process. There's not really a good questionnaire to really solicit this. You have to have good interviewing technique in order for you to understand this from the standpoint of the individual. Now, when we do the medical evaluation, what are we looking for as causes of impairment, particularly cognitive impairment? Are there medical problems that can actually cause this? Is there depression? Is there some sort of thyroid problem? Does that person have a vitamin deficiency? Do they have a medical illness that's actually going out of whack, like heart failure or underlying lung disease? Was there a new medication that actually was prescribed recently that leads to side effects? Are there new undiagnosed medical problems? Are there new undiagnosed mood disorders? Or does this just represent a new undiagnosed cognitive disorder? These are all the questions that are a component of this evaluation, because if it's reversible, then we don't expect the incapacity to actually be permanent. We may expect that there may be some recovery and they may be able to make decisions for themselves, but if it is a permanent progressive disorder, then we have to address this issue for sure. So we talked about these earlier. There are a lot of different cognitive tests that are available. And for the average individual who sees me in clinic, you can use many of these. And if a person's score is not in the normal range, it tells you what the impairment is. And depending upon where they have the impairments, it can tell you what type of problem that they may have, whether it's due to memory or executive functioning, or if it's due to attention. In individuals who really have high levels of education, we rely on our neuropsychology colleagues to do cognitive testing to determine where the impairments are in cognition. But once again, this just gives an idea of where the cognitive impairment actually is. And the scoring tells us whether or not they're in the normal range or abnormal range. We talked about this evaluation. And then where the impairments lie may be an explanation for, may be explained by the type of medical problem that is going on in these individuals. So there's a tie, there's a link between the cognitive impairment that you identify and the medical problems that that person has. And then after that, we really go into the decision-making capacity, and we ask these very specific questions, or I look for these very specific answers to these questions after I do the cognitive testing. Is there functional impairment? Does the cognitive impairment explain functional impairment? Does the patient recognize that this impairment is present? Does that person recognize that the impact of their impairment on their functional status? And if they don't recognize it, have there been decisions made that negatively impact that person's ability to manage that person's medical care needs? So does that person understand that their needs aren't being met, or that someone is actually meeting those care needs? And if a person is trying to provide care for that person and that individual who has the impairment is resisting it, that's also worthwhile to note, because that shows an impairment in in judgment as well, that they're resisting these interventions to help to preserve their ability to live independently at home. And then the last question is, will this impairment resolve? Is it reversible? And these are all important questions to ask when you're looking to complete a capacity evaluation and a statement of expert evaluation. So just as the last part of this, as part of COVID-19, we've been really restricted in terms of being able to see patients face-to-face. So I've been working hand in hand with the Cuyahoga County Adult Protective Services to do these capacity evaluations remotely. And we've been kind of piloting these face-to-face visits on virtual platforms to see whether or not they're actually being conducted. And this article that was published by Dr. Halfin and his colleagues in Baylor in Texas gives us a framework for how to conduct these online. And it really integrates many of the interventions or many of the elements that I talked about when I was talking about the capacity evaluations. And just as a last part of this, this is the broad kind of outline for how the decision tree actually takes place. If you look, again, the cognitive evaluation just shows that there's impairment in cognitive function, but you still need to see whether or not that person has failed to have his needs met with regards to the decision-making capacity. So that element of understanding the process and giving a rationale for the decisions is also an important component of this evaluation. But then there's also that last part on the bottom. You can see that based on that person's impairment, there may be ways to actually mitigate the impairment and the interventions that are necessary to help to keep a person at home. Maybe that person needs more limited supervision. There are community services that can support a person at home, or in more severe circumstances, those needs that a person have, are they just too much for community services to be able to meet in the community? And in that case, does that person need a longer term plan for placement and supervision? So these are all important elements for the capacity evaluation. So a very broad array of questions to be asked, but ultimately it's a big question that the clinicians actually have to answer about decision-making capacity. And just the final key point is, again, the cognitive testing is not enough. You really have to conduct a very thorough investigation with regards to understanding and understanding the reasoning behind that person's choices to complete the capacity evaluation. And that is the one element that really is most useful for all the other services that the clinicians work with, whether it be APS or probate court, to help them make the final determination of who's going to be the one responsible for making the decisions for the individual, whether it's that individual, that they're capable of making decisions for themselves, or someone has to be assigned to make those decisions in that person's best interest because they had resisted the whole time. So that being said, I'm open to any questions. Hopefully I answered some of the questions that were brought up earlier.
I hope so too. April and Monica, do we have any questions for Dr. Factor?
There are no questions for Dr. Factor at this time, but if there are, we'll go ahead and mention those in the printout. Okay.
April, you thought that you had some questions that would be answered, so we just, Dr. Factor was just wondering if he was able to answer those?
Yeah, one of the questions was about how APS and capacity evals interact. So I think he covered that. That was the one question that I was considering.
So the one thing, Dr. Factor, and I think that you and Natasha did mention, but I think what's interesting is in the Adult Protective Service law, the word competent is never once mentioned because it's assumed when people are adults, you're competent. So the issues that I think is real important, and that's why in the APS law, Natasha actually read the definition of an incapacitated person. So I think what we need to remember, because you brought up two things. I've heard many times people say, when we talk about judgment, like they'll say, oh, they're not incompetent, they just have poor judgment. And I want you to comment a little bit more, because what you're saying is that it's a combination of, so you don't just want to do a mini mental and say, okay, they're fine, but by having an evaluation, we can determine based on the risk and based on the harm that it's probably a good idea to assume something's wrong, that by bringing into someone like you, we can have a better understanding what's causing it. Is it reversible? We can treat it. or to at least understand what the functioning is, so we can start assessing whether or not someone truly is understanding what's going on.
Right. Yeah, there's several elements to this. The cognitive testing is just one part. It tells you that there's a cognitive impairment, but the insight and the judgment, those questions are really necessary to determine whether or not a person has capacity. Do they understand that there's a problem going on, that they are not able to meet some of their care needs? And that recognition is important, because if they do recognize it, the next question is, well, what are you going to do about it? And that would reflect their understanding that they need to get help, or they're refusing help for whatever reason. So, and then that reasoning, whether it's due to a lack of understanding that there's a problem at all, or a refusal, resources in the community to support a person, the answer to that question and the clinician's own kind of belief in the reasoning behind it is what reflects the understanding component. And that person has to be able to express the reason why they don't need these services, why they do need the services, and what those services are meant to actually provide for them. And if a person does show insight that they have a problem, and they demonstrate understanding about why they do or do not need these services, and there's a logic behind it that is reasonable, even if you don't necessarily agree with it, then those are the elements that are necessary to show that a person does have decision-making capacity. But if they're missing the understanding, that insight part, that they don't think there's an issue, even though everyone else says that there's a problem, or there's evidence behind that, or they don't demonstrate adequate understanding of why they need these services in the home, then they have impaired capacity as a result of the lack of insight and or the lack of understanding or judgment in accepting services that are meant to support them at home.
Yes. Thank you. I really appreciate you spending time with us and going over these. I think we can probably do a full day seminar just on your topic alone, in terms of the value of assessments and why they're so important, especially when people are being victimized. Because I think, in America we have civil rights and people have the right to make their own decisions. But I think we have to balance that with the things like you mentioned, the right to make an informed decision. So self-determination assumes that someone is able to weigh the consequences and weigh out the pros and cons. So I want to thank you. I do want to tell everyone that the Elder Abuse Commission has the subcommittee, the Direct Practice Subcommittee is actually looking at this issue, because one of the things we're recognizing in Ohio is that not in every county do we have resources like the Cleveland Clinic, where you have geriatricians who are actively available to provide assessments. So one of the things that we want to do in this committee right now is we're doing a survey to find out what kind of training has been provided, and to try to identify where the specialists are, because I always tell people some things are worth driving for. But the other thing we're going to do, and maybe it'll be the basis of next year's June event, we will be hosting a webinar specifically looking at guidelines for conducting proper geriatric evaluations and capacity evaluations, because we're recognizing at this point in Ohio there's not a standard. So we're hoping to get that as a product of the Elder Abuse Commission. So that concludes our event for today. I want to thank everyone who participated. As we mentioned several times, we will have the PowerPoint available to everyone as a PDF, as well as the handouts that Natasha referenced, which is a toolkit that has information about elder exploitation and resources. And then for those of you that want CEUs, we will be sending out a post survey for you to fill out based on the evaluation of the event. As far as the CLEs for attorneys, the information will be posted for you as well. You'll receive an evaluation to be filled out, and then you yourself will be going into the Supreme Court to finish the process for the CLEs. My name and number are on the webpage right now. So if anything comes up and you have any concerns, you hopefully will reach out to me, and I'll do my best to get you an answer as soon as possible. I'm sorry we went over. This was our first webinar, And I think it went pretty well, but if you would like to let us know how we did and how we can improve, we'll take your feedback as well. So again, I want to thank everyone, and thank you very much for participating. And that concludes our program for today. Thank you. I want to thank you to my interpreters. You guys did a great job. I really appreciate it. It helped us make a good success. Thank you. Bye, everyone. Now, April and Annika, we're gonna go into a practice mode.